Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Barry Erickson, and I'm Community Engagement Coordinator here at Wheaton Public Library. Tonight, we're delighted to bring you another art demonstration provided in partnership with the DuPage Art League. Founded over 60 years ago, the DuPage Art League is dedicated to promoting and encouraging the visual arts through classes, workshops, gallery exhibits, and public programs such as this one. We are grateful to the Art League for arranging tonight's demonstration by acclaimed artist Joel Fremion. Based in Indiana, Joel creates unique and intricate fabric collages. His work includes portraits, landscapes, and still life. We're going to begin tonight by sharing this video interview that is also on Joel's website if you'd like to watch it again sometime. So with your patience, I'm going to cue up the video.
My name is Joel Fremion. Welcome to my studio in Ossian, Indiana. I'm a fabric collage artist or mixed media 2D artist. I've been perfecting my technique of fabric collage since 1975. I've produced roughly 350 pieces in that time. From a young age, I always had an interest in art, design, and architecture. And throughout my early years, I bounced around not knowing, what I was going to do when I grew up. I always took all the art and design classes that I could. While I was studying painting, after about 5 semesters, I discovered that I was not a happy painter. I complained to my profs that I had never completed a painting, that I was beating them up, overworking them to a point of destruction. One of my profs knew that I came from a line of fabric workers and suggested that I would play around with some of the fabric samples I had been holding back, which I did. And I completed my first collage in 1975. And from that point forward, I saw the medium of fabric collage being more of a small building project as opposed to painting. And for that reason, they went together in a different fashion and a much more satisfactory result as far as my considering them being complete. I often compare the joy that I take in my work with getting hooked on a really good novel. When I find a book that I really, really want to read, I usually complete it in 2 or 3, 4 days, depending on how long it is. I'm compulsive about getting to the end. And that's very much the way I feel when I start a collage. I've decided on the subject matter, and I'm excited to get it started. Sometimes that takes a while to come up with the right composition and the right subject matter. But once that's done, and once I spend the first 3, 4 hours on it, I'm hooked. And the rest of the process is like the novel. I can't wait to get to the next chapter. I can't wait to get to the end. And as I've gotten older, I'm increasingly hung up on craftsmanship, making it as best it can be, and seeing it through to its completion. I think fine craftsmanship, doing something really well, developing something that nobody can do, are all things that drive me and give me great pleasure. I can't craft an item good enough. I'm always looking to improve it, to make it present better, to frame it better, to create an extraordinary object. Be obsessed with creating something extraordinary. I think that's what art is. Creating the extraordinary. I turned 70 this summer, and although I've been doing my art most of my life, I finally feel where I've reached a level that is being recognized beyond my home state, offering opportunities that I've never had before, opening up opportunities to travel, not only seeking subject matter, but opportunities to exhibit my work in places I never could have dreamed of. When I show my work, people can see the labor involved, and that gives me great pleasure. I'm never hesitant to tell people how I do it and encourage them to try it. But I think I've always meant to be an artist, and I'm very content. I don't know what I would do with my hours if I were not in my studio working.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. So, Joel, if you you'll want to unmute yourself and can go ahead and get started.
Hello, everyone. And again, welcome to my home and studio in Ossian, Indiana. I'll give you a little bit more background on how I got started in this technique. I started college in 1970. I spent a year in Bloomington at Indiana University. I came from a line of fabric workers. My mother was an interior designer. My grandparents owned a very well-known custom upholstery drapery shop in Fort Wayne, which is a little north of me here in Ossian. So I grew up in Fort Wayne. My mother always wanted me to join the family business. My dad had begun restoring old homes. So I had a real strong interest in architecture, but not really new architecture. I wanted to restore old buildings. And so my interest in my early college was really more in interior and architectural design. My mom convinced me that to come back to Fort Wayne my sophomore year and enroll in a program that Purdue had set up in Fort Wayne, and it was called the Division of General and Technical Studies. It offered an interior design, architectural design program. And the gentleman that taught the architectural design program was also a really good painter. And after studying with him for a couple semesters and he realizing that I could draw, there was also a really good private art school in Fort Wayne called the Fort Wayne Art Institute. And he, more than anyone in my life, opened my eyes to not only the art world, but the design world at large. International design. He knew I had a strong interest in architecture. And so he thought it would really benefit my career to take a curriculum in fine art. So I enrolled at the Art Institute and I took a full curriculum with art history, figure drawing. I took metalsmithing, I took pottery, I took photography. I took several semesters of art history, along with coupling that with my architectural design program. I eventually went to work for Dale Ambren, who was the gentleman that taught the architectural design program and was his apprentice for a couple of years. But back to my collages. It was at the Fort Wayne Art Institute that one of my profs suggested, after my complaining that I was not happy with painting, that I go to collage. My first studio was above a 19th century brick Victorian home that my mother had restored for her design studios. It had a third floor attic that I redesigned into my first studio. So while I was going to art school, I had below me tons of fabric, a half a dozen professional seamstresses at my disposal if I should choose to use them. And so when my prof suggested going to and using some fabric instead of paint, I had easy access to the materials. And the first collage that I did in 1975 was kind of a takeoff on a Cubist Picasso head. And I did it as a loose tapestry. I don't do them that way anymore. But that's how the first one was done. And it was the first piece I ever sold. I sold it in 1975 for $500, which I never thought I would ever do anything like that. So it came as a complete surprise to me. But then I did another one in 1976, and that was about the end of my college curriculum. I was a full-time student for 5 years, and then I started buying buildings and restoring buildings, and that led me into the design business, led me into the antique business, and I got married in 1978. I had my first daughter in 1979. So from 1976, I did not complete my third collage until 1991. So there was almost 15 years between the second and the third collage. I had started painting again. We always had a gallery shop, and I always had a corner where I could set up an easel. And I was painting again in the 80s to the same feelings about completing paintings that I had felt as a student in the 70s. And I had given the second collage to an older sister when she graduated from med school. And she was doing a stint in Toronto. So I lost track of that piece for several years. And when she moved back to Indiana, and I saw that piece probably in 1984, 85, I really had fond memories of making it. And the whole collage medium concept came back to me. And I was about 39 years old at the time and wanted to free up some time to start remaking my artwork. So my third piece was a takeoff on a Cezanne. I was a big lover of the Impressionists. My first museum visit was the Art Institute of Chicago, which I visited many times as a college student and thereafter. And because I never studied still life painting, the Cezanne still lifes have always just struck me. There's something about them, their composition, that I just truly love. So when I decided to do a collage still life, I kind of took it off of a Cezanne. I loved his compositions. I loved his use of gray. I didn't know color like I know it now, and Cezanne taught me about gray, which is, I think, the most important color in nature. And that'll lead me to where I'm at now. So when I started a piece last Wednesday, and I chose a Cezanne. As a matter of fact, the number 3 collage that I did in 1991, I did an abbreviated. I kind of cut the corners off of it, did just the center part of it. The piece that I'm going to be working on tonight is the full Cezanne. Barry, maybe this would be a good time to put up the first slide of how I start these things.
Sure.
When I started this piece last Wednesday, and what I've done for Barry is I've started with a blank piece of canvas. The next slide would be the drawing on top of the canvas. I use a 10 to 12 pound cotton canvas, unprimed. It's very toothy and takes glue very well. I have a large board. I call it my easel, but it's a big panel that I can stretch my canvases on. And I stretch them because I'm now presenting them like an oil painting. So the canvas needs to be stretched during the gluing process so that when it's completed and composed, it's machine stitched on a commercial straight stitch sewing machine. And to
excuse me, I'm sorry. One second. Are you all seeing the piece now?
I am.
Okay, great. So I'm sorry to interrupt, Joel. So they're looking at the stretched piece of canvas now. So we should be ready to go.
Okay, that's the stretched canvas up on the board. I just use push pins because I want it vertical and I want it flat, but it needs to be in the stretched form that it will be when it's completed and stretched onto canvas bars. The next image is the drawing. What I do is I will, whatever I'm working from, photography or if it's a painting, you'll see the photograph of the Cezanne that I'm working on next to the piece. And that's what I cut up. I mean, I basically am using that drawing as my template. You can go maybe to the first day, Barry. You know, as I do a real loose drawing, you know, I just basically start with the background on a still life and kind of work from the outside in. In this piece, I did the background first. I did the table. I did the chair in the upper portion of the canvas. And then I'm just slowly working towards the center. The next image, that would be day 2. I was able to work on these pieces for probably 6 hours on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So each of these progression pieces is representing about 6 hours of labor. The next piece, is it up? Is that that would be the 4th day?
Yeah, you started your base.
I think that this is from last Friday, this last image. Now I'm going to have Joey move the camera over so you can see the piece as it's progressed.
Yeah, and here's the last one where like you've got some work done on the basket as well.
I just finished I had a little bit of the basket that I hadn't finished in that last image, and I was able to get it done in the last few hours. But here's the piece, and you know, I'm
gonna stop the share at this point, and we'll spotlight you so that they can see. There we go. Thank you.
You want to zoom in on that? I'm using on this piece. I'm using a multitude of fabrics. I'm using a sort of a tapestry weave fabric that is working well for the background. I've used a gray. I use mostly upholstery grade fabrics. Silks and satins aren't real good. They'll because the pieces are glued on and the glue bleeds through satins and silks. If you can use them, but you need to paint the back of them just so that they will resist the glue seeping through. But on primary colors, which is usually if I would use a silk or satin, I'm usually now finding a more textured fabrics that I'll paint in whatever variations of orange or red that I may need to construct an orange or an apple. I use a lot of leathers and suedes, mostly the suede side of leather. This chair leg is leather. A lot of the pieces in the basket are leather and suedes. This is another kind of a tapestry weave fabric that's got a real open weave. And I do paint on top of the fabrics. Cezanne particularly, and Van Gogh also, did a lot of heavy outlining, which I don't commonly do, but I find it very informative, and compositionally, I think that with a still life particularly, it's useful, and I understand, I think now why they did it. But I'm gonna do some of the whites tonight. I started a little bit ago on the tablecloth, and I'm gonna start on some of the whites and show you how I do it, because let's start with this piece right here. And as far as the materials that you need to do this canvas, you need glue. I use either a fabric glue or Elmer's glue, just as long as it dries clear, it works. I use an X-Acto knife to cut my pieces, although you have to be careful not to use a real sharp X-Acto knife because it will not only cut through your drawing, but it'll cut through your canvas. And so I use kind of a semi-dull. This piece, unfortunately, I ran out of the construction paper that I usually use. This is a lighter weight paper. I would suggest using a more heavy, toothy paper. Not only will that be stiffer, because what I'm doing is I'm cutting it off the drawing. And then I take it and I'm using tons of Scotch tape, cheap Scotch tape. I buy it by the dozens. When I first did these, I did it like a dressmaker or a drapery maker where I would pin the pattern to the piece of fabric. That proved very inexact. And now I tape it. I tape it. I'll show you how I do it. I have been setting aside some whites and off-whites in preparation. And this sort of bone white, I use as much the backside of the fabric as the front of the fabric, particularly on tapestry weave fabrics where you kind of, one side of it's, this isn't a good example because a lot of times the backside is very muted and not as colorful, but you get the pattern that I like. But I will find the right fabric. I will take my piece of the pattern. I use Fisker's scissors. When I first started doing these, Fiskars weren't being produced. And my mother's seamstresses who loved what I was doing were buying me all these very expensive stainless steel scissors, which proved very abrasive to my hands. These Fisker scissors are wonderful, and they're very lightweight, very easy to use. Your thumb is not completely enclosed in them, so they're very handy. I love them, and I go through tons of them because you need a good sharp pair of scissors if you're going to do this. And sometimes if it's a big piece of fabric, say the background up here, while I'm cutting the piece, sometimes, and I'll just show you, sometimes I'll glue this surface also. It really creates a great bond. Some of my early pieces where I didn't do this, I've had a little bit of bubbling where I had some air pockets within the piece. That doesn't happen anymore because if you glue both surfaces, you get a really good bond. And I've got a little roller that I use to roll it out, so it really remains nice and flat. I actually, you probably can't see it, but I've learned once you apply a water-based glue to any piece of fabric, even leathers and suedes, it wants to expand. And so what I've learned to do is I cut just fractionally into my piece. So it's a tiny bit smaller. It's easier to push it into place than it is to go back and have to cut it again after you've glued the back of it. I'm using the back of this piece of fabric, right? I may use the front of it in another spot on this piece.
Excuse me, Joel, just to be clear, are you putting that tape all the way around the outline, the perimeter of the piece, and then cutting right across the tape?
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
Thank you.
I had some problems early on, but when I wasn't, when I didn't realize that I was getting out of my pattern, and that's what happens if you cut a piece of fabric that is too big, and you don't adjust it, you kind of blow out your pattern, and you'll get some distortions that, you know, early on I was complimented for those distortions, but it wasn't because I meant to do it. It was because I blew out my pattern. I always keep a damp cloth around to soak up any glue that might seep out. This, as you can see, and one of the nice surprises about this technique is, you know, I glued the backside. Well, this is a raised pattern, and you can kind of see it coming through now. I mean, I love that when stuff like that happens because it adds a lot of visual interest, I think, to the piece. Then I will use, as you can see here on my ledge here, I use tons of magic markers, both the watercolor and indelible. I've got acrylic paints here. I use exclusively acrylic when I add paints to the surface because they dry quickly. So as this is drying, I'll work on another area. I'll let that dry, and I'll come over here, and I'm going to cut this gray out that's over here. The gray, again, I've used this is the gray that I've used on the background, and you see the reverse side of it is a really lovely lighter shade of the same gray. So again, I make use of both sides of the fabric.
Joel, can you tell us a little bit about some of the sources for the fabric that you use?
When I started doing these, you know, my mother had been giving her fabric books every year to the design department at Purdue University. And I don't know if it's still the same today, but back then, every year you had to renew your fabric books. So your old ones became obsolete. And so when I started doing this, and I actually had started saving some fabrics, some nice tapestry weave fabrics that I don't know. When I was in art school, I was all over the place. So I thought, you know, maybe I could do something with these at some point. But when my first collages started coming out, I mean, I was inundated. Every designer in the area, plus every furniture store, I could have loaded a tractor trailer with fabric samples. Back then, the samples weren't as large, so it kind of can be problemsome if you get just the right fabric, but you only got like an 8-inch square piece of it. Now I'm always looking for particular textures and colors, grays, browns, blues. There are resale upholstery shops where they sell scrap leather. I buy a lot of leather from them. You can go online, and there's tons of leather scraps available online, and they're relatively cheap. I would never buy a hide. That would be much too expensive. And You can get them from furniture companies that use leather, have just tons of scraps. So the material cost is very little. The cost of the canvas, obviously, I don't use that much paint, but I have a ton in paint costs. So they go together like, I tell people that it's like building your own jigsaw puzzle. And I think that's what I love about them, because it's kind of like I'm used to more organization and order than painting provided me. And this is like a step-by-step process that once you get it down, it doesn't matter whether you're doing a landscape or a still life or a portrait. It's really all about shapes. You see here, most of the fruit in this is just, at this point, they're just shapes of a pear or an apple. It's not until I really get onto that point that I start adding all the little light and shade. There could be 10 pieces of fabric in this piece of fruit here when I'm finished. And it's important to pull your pattern away from your fabric, or else you'll glue it down and then it gets to be a problem. This may look like a mess, but I know where everything's at. Just finding it.
Just a reminder to our audience to go ahead and put any questions that you have in the Q&A so that I can read those aloud for you. Joel, I see we've got a couple of questions in the chat. Someone is asking, is it easier to work from the outside to the center? I believe that's what you said. Why did you decide to work with that process?
I think the still lifes maybe, but I think that with the landscapes and the portraits too. I mean, with a portrait, I would do the background first, and then I would kind of work. Yeah, so I would work from the outside in on a portrait. Not the landscapes so much. The landscapes, they never start and finish in the same spot. That's what I love about this process. It's just it just intrigues me, and every time I do them, I think I'm approaching it a little differently than I did the last one.
So to be clear, is there do you tend to start in one particular spot, or how do you decide where to start on each piece?
I think the still life's the background. Finding the right background and getting that in, and then and also the portraits. I think I always start with the background, and then obviously you got to get the shape of the head just right while you're doing the background. But I think that's typically the way I do it. The landscapes, I never start and finish the landscape in the same spot, so I think the landscapes are a little more unique as it pertains to any rhyme or reason to where I start and finish. It might be the sky. I would put in it. It's got a big sky. I would put the sky in first. I use a lot of my kids. I've got 3 daughters and 7 grandkids, and so I have a lifetime supply of used denim. In this piece, this cabinet here in the back is mostly blue jeans. But I'll show you some pieces that have a sky, and I'll do the sky in blue jeans, and then I'll hand paint it, do sort of a pointless sky on top of the blue jeans to get the right tonal value. If it's got clouds, I may indicate those in paint as opposed to fabric.
And I've got a couple more questions about supplies. Can you tell us again the kind of glue that you use?
I use just an Elmer's glue, or if you go into a fabric store, they might sell you some fabric glue, but it's basically the same thing. They're probably going to charge you more money for it. I've had good luck with Elmer's glue. It just, again, your substrate is important. You wouldn't want to mount these on a primed piece of canvas because I don't think you're going to get the glue bond that you get with unprimed canvas.
Okay, and at some point you use a roller on the fabric. Can you tell us a little bit more about when you use that?
And when they're not quite dry, I'll just run this roller over them, and it just, particularly if I've glued the back and the front. I mean, once this dries, you can't take it off. It's a permanent bond. I don't think there's any way, if I wanted to, that I could get this piece of fabric off of this canvas at this point.
Okay. And does the fabric you're using ever overlap? Do you put pieces on top of each other?
Never. No, when I first started doing these, I was struggled with what to call them. Collage, I think of is a French term, and I think of collage as overlapping. The French Picasso used a lot of paper collage in his paintings, so I struggled with what to call them. And to this day, I don't know that collage is the best terminology for what these are, because my approach is to no overlapping. They're put together like a jigsaw puzzle.
So even those really, you were talking about a very detailed part, like the fruit might have, 8 or 10 pieces. Those are individually cut next to each other, not overlapping.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Correct.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, okay, you go ahead.
Someone's asking about if the fabric ever ravels and if that's an issue and what you might do to address it. Raveling or straight threads?
The ends. Yeah, you have to be kind of conscious of that. What I've learned is if it's a fabric I love and I know that it's going to do that, I'll paint the back of it. I'll put a primer coat of white on the back of it, and that really stiffens it and eliminates that. I have been. It's funny because even the gals in my mother's workshop, when I first started doing these, when you make drapes, you turn all the fabric under, and the early criticism of my work was from quilters and drapery makers because I wasn't turning all the edges under, which at the time I was working in larger pieces, and I maybe could have done that. But when I think of, some of these small pieces here and the fact that they're leather and suede, it would be virtually impossible. So I plead guilty. I'm going to do all the whites on this before the last thing I'm going to do on this piece is going to be the fruits, which I probably have left on this piece. At this point in time, I probably have 30 to 40 hours maybe invested in this piece. When I'm done, I've got another probably 3 days, so another maybe 20 hours that it'll take to complete this piece. And then when I get it completely finished, I take these pins out. So it basically is holding, it's stretching, it's very stiff. But I do not do the stitching on these. I have them completely machine stitched on a straight stitch sewing machine. And I'll show you the back of one of them. this is what they look like on the back. Show you the front of this. So, you know, this piece here is a little bit more detailed than the piece I'm working on. So the stitching is a little bit more intense on the back. But they all look kind of like a road map on the back. But I have my adhesive process down to a point now where I really wouldn't need to stitch them. But I love the effect that stitching has on them. It just adds a detail that is really neat.
So, Jill, do you do the stitching, or do you hire someone to do that?
I have a professional seamstress, and I've done, this is number 372. I've only had 2 seamstresses in the last 31 years. And the gal that does my stitching now is, and it's very atypical stitching. When I lost my first seamstress, I was fearful that I would never find anybody that would take them on. None of the women in my mother's workshop wanted, I would give them to them and they would bring them back the next day. It's very atypical stitching, and you have to find the right seamstress. And I swear if I had 6 seamstresses, I could look on the back of the piece and tell you who stitched it. Every seamstress has kind of a signature stitch. But my seamstress now, she's probably done the last 270. And I'm praying that she outlives me. She's 15 years, I think, my younger. And I'm just praying that she outlives me, because I wouldn't want to find another seamstress. My work has got a little more complex in the last 10 years. I've done a lot of city scenes and a lot of tight landscapes that have really challenged my abilities. But I love the challenge, and I think my work is still progressing.
No, someone else is asking, as far as I believe this relates to choosing the fabric. Do you work with color first, and then like the material, the weave or the construction second, or how? Can you tell us a little bit more about how you choose the fabrics?
In the early days, I would spend an inordinate amount of time seeking out the right fabric. But what I had learned in the meantime is that it's mostly textural qualities that I like. And so if it's not the right color, I will tint it. I call it staining, actually. And I'm using acrylic that's really watered down because I don't want it to be thick and interrupt the threading. I just want to tint it blue or brown, the colors that I need. But obviously, if I can find the right color fabric, I will use it. But in most cases, for instance, this piece, this gray here, is actually this fabric. And, you know, this has just got some beautiful greens and pinks and light aqua purples. It's just lovely. And so I put just a light coat of acrylic on top of that. You probably can't see it from that camera, but you can still see the texture underneath. And I really like doing that, where, you know, I can change the light and dark of it, but still maintain the pattern underneath.
So the weave of the fabric is perhaps what's most important.
I think that certainly adds a lot of interest to the collage. I mean, a lot of times when I set up an exhibit, painters will walk by and they'll be 15 feet away, and they'll have to take kind of a double take. And, you know, they can see that there's something else going on. And I think that it's that. I've learned through experience that the depth of color in the fabric seems to be deeper than in most paints. And another advantage I have to my work is that because of what it is, it's fabric, it lights up beautifully. It's not at all reflective. And so you can't overlight it. I always suggest when people get them in their homes that they flood them with light, because they literally light up beautifully. They love artificial light.
Okay, and I've got another question or two about the stitching. Is the stitching used to outline the pieces or to add texture?
To outline them. I mean, they basically were done early on. You know, I was taught, you know, when you build something, build it to last. And so my early ones, I just wasn't quite sure if my gluing process would be good enough, and basically climate changes. So I just and because I had access to seamstresses, it just seemed like kind of a natural. And then once I started doing it and found the right seamstresses, it adds a design element that is very unusual. I mean, I don't know of anybody else that's building collages just like this. My process has evolved over time, and it's gotten a little more technical, and my seamstress has been along for the ride. So I think we're putting out a really, really, really good, solid product now. These when they're done would be very hard to puncture, like an oil painting, where you know, if you they're very thick. They've got a thick canvas layer, a glue layer, and then the fabric layer. So they're very durable.
We've had a couple of requests for close-ups of things. So if possible, if we could move the camera close and get a close-up of your reference image, the Cezanne, and then a close-up of the piece that you're working on. There's a little bit of glare on that, but maybe we can, yeah, much better, thank you. Yeah. So that's the reference image. And then if we can get close to the piece that you're working on, we might be able to see a little bit of the texture of the fabric.
Yeah, I think you can. You know, some of these fabrics are really thick. Like this has got a real nice to heavy upholstery grade fabric. I will go back into this background too. I'm not, you know, I'm going to add some colors to the grays. A lot of times I won't use the same color for the background. I may change it. This one I did. I just thought it was more consistent. But I'm going to paint on top of this and add some color to it before I'm finished with the piece.
That's great. Thank you so much. And there was one other request for a close-up. Could we get see up close the finished piece where there was already the stitching on it
Sure.
in the front, perhaps, and then we can really see the effect of that stitching.
I'll bring out a portrait too, so that I'll show you a portrait front and back. This happens to be San Miguel de Allende, Mexico.
Okay.
And then
yeah, I don't know if the camera can pick up the stitching on it.
Are you seeing it now?
Yeah, great. Thank you.
I'm going to get it one. This is one of my portraits. I've done a whole series of portraits of my fellow artist friends in the area. And this one on the back, I usually try to get my artist friends in front of one of their pieces of artwork.
Great, thank you.
Now, let's see where I want to go here. This is that same tapestry weave that I used on this piece. So I'll be able to show you what it looks like without any paint on it. So this I will lighten this up, but I love the patterns underneath here. It's just that it just I think adds interest to the piece. And I will keep. Well, I'll show you how I do it. Sometimes if I'm doing a large piece of fabric, I'll dampen it first. If you dampen it first, you can really regulate the amount of color that you put on it. You can just put a real light tint on it, or you can just, if it's wet, you can continue to add more color.
And you're adding acrylic paint, is that correct?
Right now, I've got just a little bit of white and gray on there, but I'm just dampening it. So once you dampen it, I'll show you, just depending on how much white you put in it, see how it takes, it kind of bleeds then. But when this dries, this pattern is still wet, so it'll start popping through again. And I really like that interplay. Sometimes I will do, again, Cezanne particularly did a lot of outlining. So like on this where the fold is right here, he's actually got a really faint line. This is a piece of gray suede here, and I'm going to lighten it just a little bit too while I'm at it. when you can kind of see the pattern on this too. Another neat thing, when you've got these raised patterns on the fabric, if you're using a dry brush, you can just kind of highlight this squirrely stuff going on here. Squiggly. If you apply too much paint, I always keep a wet cloth around. And you can, again, kind of spread the paint around or take it all off if you don't like it. Kind of a seam that's running down through here.
I do have a couple of other questions about the stitching. Someone is asking if the seamstress uses a straight stitch or a small zigzag stitch.
She's using a commercial straight stitch.
Okay. And
I have done a couple really large pieces that really tested the limits that what she could do on a commercial straight stitch. And if it gets big in any direction, I usually have to create a composition that is dividable. And then I'll do it in actually 2 sections and then get it sewn and sew it all back together as a whole. Recently, I was approached about another big commission, and we're looking into a little bit different kind of machine, not a swing arm, but one that gives her a much larger work area to get the machine maneuvered into where it needs to be.
And is the stitching always done in black?
No, not always. Mostly, but if it's a really strong sky, I'll usually have her do a white or a light blue in the sky. But most of them are a black or a real dark brown stitch.
Okay. And is there a particular type of thread that she uses?
Good question. I don't think so. I think it's just that, it's again atypical stitching because you're going through 3 different layers. You're going through the leather or upholstery grade. You're going through a canvas layer, a glue layer, and then the canvas layer. But she it's a commercial grade machine, but she seems to do it with just typical threads.
Okay, and I've got one other question queued up here. Is there a final coat of anything to preserve the painted piece at the end?
No, I mean, I think a lot of contemporary upholstery fabrics are Scotch guarded, and a lot of my pieces have additional paint on them. But I have them now that are almost 50 years old, and what I inform people is to make sure you don't put them on a strong sunlit wall. I mean, you wouldn't want to put any good piece of artwork on a strong sunlit wall. That would be damaging to the piece. I've displayed them in restaurants. I think a glass of Merlot might damage them. But even then, I don't know if they could be dry cleaned. I think they maybe could be dry cleaned. I think they're really pretty durable.
Right, and you said that they could handle strong artificial light, and they're perhaps best lit that way.
Yes, I mean with the new LED lights, I wouldn't put a hot halogen, but I think they're a thing of the past. With the new LED lights, they're the wave of the future, and they're are creating brighter light and with no heat. So yes, you wouldn't want to put a lot of heat on them, but a remote painting light or a overhead spot, really accents them nicely.
Great, thank you.
What am I going to do next here? Let's put this piece right here. I generally have jazz music going in the background. I'm at a loss. I need music when I'm working, and I love jazz. So typically, my radio is on, and I'm tuned into some good jazz. I find it very conducive to what I'm doing artistically. I'm going to add a little white to that. This is actually the flip side of this fabric here. I painted this piece of fabric. It was a little bit more bone white, but I like the pattern to it. So I put some white on it earlier. You can see what it kind of looks like on the back. But I put some white on it. It's still not quite dry, but I'm going to cut a piece anyways from this. Can they see me there, Joey?
Just to be clear, so sometimes you paint the fabric ahead of time if you know that you're going to be using it in a particular area?
Yep. Particularly a still like this, because it's really difficult to find the range, say a range of 3 reds or 3 oranges, 3 yellows. Usually I find those colors in the silks and satins, but I don't really like to use those. I like to use a more textured fabric. So, while I'm working on other areas, I'll find the textures that I want, and then I'll do a range of oranges, pre-paint them, because again, what I find interesting in my still lifes is that, this might have 10 pieces of fabric when it's done. And there are all these different textures and diagonals that are kind of working together to create the whole. And it just, I don't know. I would rather do it that way than to put the piece of fabric on there and then paint it. Like that's to me more painterly. And I like and I think that's what maybe I love about Cezanne is they're kind of faceted. You know, he's got some hard edges, and I love the way everything comes together in a Cezanne still life. He has informed me so much on composition over the years, and I hope a little bit of Cezanne shines through on some of my still lifes. The problem with cutting it with tape doesn't want to stick to the wet fabric. So I probably shouldn't use that. A piece like this will once I'm finished with this, my seamstress will probably spend 8 to 10 hours on her machine stitching this piece.
Joel, someone is asking for a clarification on the taping process and how you tape the piece of your drawing to the fabric.
You mean they want to do? You want me to show them more clearly how I do it?
Maybe that would be helpful.
All right, the next piece. I'm literally though. I'm cutting the pattern off the drawing. And here, I'll show it to you. All right, see there's my drawing. I'm removing the piece and I'm going to replace it with the fabric. But it just depending on how exacting you want to be. I mean, if you wanted to approach this medium as an abstract medium, I mean, it might be cooler to, just starting cutting pieces and fitting them together without a drawing. I mean, there's so many different approaches you could take to, and I have done some abstractions where leather is particularly. I mean, I've done some abstractions. I've called them the entanglement series because, and I don't preconceive them. I just start a drawing and start dividing the composition. And what's beautiful about leathers is that they're so forgiving. You can cut them and fit them and squeeze them in, and but to me, on a still life, the life of the thing is more in the tapestry weaves. But on these abstractions, it's really exploiting the use of leathers and suedes because you can get so exacting with them. I don't think I presented any of my abstracts in the group of images that I sent to you, Barry. But if you went on my website, you could see some of the entanglement series and know what I mean.
Right, and we will be sending out the link to your website so people could take a look at those.
I'll cut another piece here and I'll show you.
Great, and you use just single-sided tape. It's not double-sided tape, correct?
Yeah, just single-sided. And I don't know if I buy my products through United Art and Supply. I think they're a national supplier. I'm not positive. But I order them online, and there's a local warehouse not too far from me where I can pick it up. But don't go to the store and buy it because the tape I use I think it's Kingsland, and it's half the price of Scotch tape you buy at Walmart or wherever. Again, this paper is not ideal. It's too thin, too hard to. It wants to fray. You want to use a heavier grade construction paper. Okay. All right. Now, Joy, can you bring that over here and if I can show them this taping? I don't know how this be. All right. I'm going to set it down here. And I'm going to tape it. I mean, so it is really down there tight. You see it? The whole thing is taped. And when I cut this, I'm going to cut right on top of that line. I mean, it's fractional, but I'm cutting into the piece of my drawing just a little bit to allow for the expansion of the fabric. Believe me, if you start these and you want a tight design, make sure you do that because you'll get frustrated having to pull your piece off of the canvas and having to cut it. The glue will get caught up in your scissors, and it's just a lot easier to just really just fractionally undercut it. And again, that's going to get some paint on it because it's awfully green. This piece right here. Well, Barry, have you shown them the images of some of my work?
Sure, we could do that next. Absolutely.
Maybe that first piece, so they can see the very first piece I did and kind of see the evolution through the years.
Sure. You want to finish gluing the piece you have in your hand now, or should I go ahead and switch over to the?
I can finish this piece, and then we can do that.
So if you're going to be painting a lot of the pieces that make up that tablecloth, are you choosing the pieces to show texture then? Since
I think that the tablecloth in this piece is going to afford the most possibility to use some interesting textures. You know, the basket is almost all leathers and suede. And I like to balance these with a nice combination of not too much leather. I think that can get kind of boring. So I think that this white tablecloth, I'm kind of going to go overboard on just different textures because it's going to kind of draw your eye into the center of the piece. All right, that's not where that goes. That's it. Yeah, I guess it is. Yeah, it is.
someone is asking if you paint the leather pieces as well, or perhaps just the suede.
I don't use a lot of the leather. I mean, occasionally when the polished side, if I want it to kind of reflect, and I could see using the polished side of leather if I had the right reds or oranges on a piece of fruit, because it that does become reflective, whereas the suedes are not at all reflective. But yes, this is a piece of suede right here that I'm painting. And what's neat you can do with suede, and I do a lot on my portraits. This is a suede that it's actually the back of a polished leather that I bought from a pet company, but the backs are all the skin tones you could possibly imagine. So I have rolls of this, and it goes from lighter than this to darker than this orange here. So it really provides me with all the facial tones that I could possibly want in doing a portrait.
Great, thank you.
But what's neat about it is, watch this. Once you apply the paint, the suede allows you to kind of go in and scrape it, and you can create some, depending on how much paint you put in. Say you want to put some. If I'm doing a guy with a mustache, I can put the skin tone on there and then lay the mustache on, and then kind of add paint to the suede and then scrape it away. So you get some kind of really cool, almost like underpainting. But you can kind of see what I've done to that piece of suede, where it's kind of just scratching through the color and revealing the original color underneath. You can do a lot of neat things with the suede.
To add even more texture.
Yes.
Great. Okay. At this point, would you like me to switch over to the slideshow?
Sure.
Okay. So I'm going to move the spotlight. Okay. So everybody should be seeing the slides, and It's full screen. Okay, the first slide is up.
Is it a big Picasso head?
Yes.
Yeah, that I did as a tapestry. And I didn't have a big wall or easel to work on, so I did it laying flat on the floor. Actually, my wife, before we were married, this was the only piece that has a dual signature on it. My wife helped me on my very first collage. But
you can just say next slide whenever you're ready to
okay,
move on to the
next slide.
Oh, all right, let me try again. There we go.
Yeah, this is another really early piece from probably 1991, and it's a farm in northern Indiana. Some friends of mine owned a farm up there. I think this was one of the first. I had never exhibited any of my work until I was 39 years old. I didn't exhibit any work while I was in college, and it wasn't until not this collage, but the one that actually is the complement to this Cezanne I'm working on. When I got it done, I thought, I really want to exhibit these. And so I chose the Hoosier Salon in Indianapolis, which is next year will be 100 years old. Not realizing they didn't accept fine craft. And again, at that point in time, I really didn't know how to categorize my work. So I entered the salon because I knew it was a prestigious organization. And I didn't learn for about 5 years. And in those first 5 years, I think I took 3 or 4 really nice awards. But I didn't realize for about 5 years that in 1991, the first year I exhibited there, that the salon did not accept fine craft. Fortunately, the jurors came to my defense and demanded that my work be in the exhibit, and consequently, it opened the door to fine craft in the Hoosier Salon. So I'm happy to say that I had a little bit to do with that happening. Now, when you go into the salon opening, there are showcases filled with pottery, jewelry, and glassware, basketry, woodworking, all elevated to the same level as the paintings. Next slide. This is the first portrait that I ever did in collage. And it's, as a matter of fact, the man on the right there, George McCulloch, was a associate professor of art at Indiana University. That's his wife next to him, who was a weaver. And they were my guinea pigs. This was the number 20 in my series of now 372, and my first attempt at a portrait in collage. And I still own that piece, and I will never sell it. George was a big influence on me also. Next slide. This is an early still life. I would oftentimes set up still lifes on my dining room table. And I always liked, there's the portrait in the upper right is a portrait of my daughter. And I always love incorporating paintings within collages. But these are just all objects that we used to have in our antique store, and I would bring them home and set them up on a table and photograph them. Next. This is actually my home in Ossian, and that's my daughter, Paige. It's called Paige in the Lily Pond. Next. This is the first piece that I did with a nighttime theme. I called it Manhattan Deli. And when I was a painter, I did nothing but bright, sunny landscapes. You know, this type of subject matter never came across to me as being something I wanted to do. But this medium has really opened a lot of possibilities for me. I've tried a lot, and the nighttime scenes have been particularly popular. I was in Paris in 2016, and we stayed in Montmartre, and I did, I don't know, a couple dozen of the, the outdoor deli restaurants in Paris. Next, this is an Indiana River landscape, and a subject matter that I just love. There's a river in Fort Wayne. We've got 3 rivers in Fort Wayne, and this is actually not one of them. This is the Wabash River, which is down in my county, Wells County. Next, I did this piece for the 2006 Hoosier Salon, and they had increased the first place prize money to $10,000. And so I thought, I'm going to do, and you have to understand that the Hoosier Salon has always been a very traditional show. And so I'm thinking I'm going to do the most traditional still life. This is a relatively small piece, but it probably has well over 100 hours of cutting and fitting in it. It's not a big image. It's a 20 by 24. But it took, on 2 occasions, my collages have taken Best Painting Awards in the Hoosier Salon because they've never created a category that really properly defines my work. Next, Chicago and the Art Institute. I love Chicago. Next, this was one of my early portraits. The early portraits weren't just headshots, but they were the artist, or this is an architect friend of mine at work on his drawing board. The early ones showed the artist that were kind of informally posed, whereas my more recent ones are just Chuck Close inspired headshots. Next. This was the first winter landscape that I ever attempted. It's a bridge, the West Main Street Bridge in Fort Wayne, and I really like it. Next. This is another one of my still lifes showing the importance of gray. Thank you, Cezanne. Next. This is Joey has been my cameraman tonight, and this piece is called Summertime, and it's my grandson, Joey, fishing in front of our gazebo. Next. Material Me is what I entitled my first. This was actually my second self-portrait, but this was the start of kind of the headshot series. And I appropriately called it Material Me. I've done 2 of them since. Next. This is another one of the informal portraits. It's a really old friend of mine, guitarist, bass player, and I had to set up a tripod in this night spot that he was at to get the low lighting effect that I wanted to relay in this piece. Next. This is one of the pieces. It's called The Pond Cleaner, and this is at Monet's Gardens at Giverny. I did a whole series of pieces on Monet's Gardens. Next. This is Florence, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Next. Paris. Paris, this is one of the early city scenes that I did that, I would rather do a city scene at night because it's much less detailed. This one was really a monster, but I just really liked the way it came out. And it's now in a collection in Princeton, New Jersey. Next. This is the beach in Prague, Czech Republic, excuse me. We were in Prague in 2018, and this is one of the pieces that came from that trip. Next. Budapest. Next. This is a piece that I did, obviously, at the Art Institute. I had been thinking of doing a piece where people are milling about in a gallery. And I had taken dozens of photographs, and we were in Chicago one weekend at the Art Institute, and I didn't realize that they had moved the Surratt into a new room, its own room. And when I walked up the steps and looked back at it, I thought, there it is. There's my gallery piece. And you know, I've always loved the Surratt and pointillism. And so it was really a challenge to do this piece. Next. San Francisco. One of my nighttime scenes that I think came out really well. Next. Prague. The main market in Prague. I love the European city scenes. It really, I get to practice my perspective when I do these European scenes. Next. Material Me Too. The first one was done in 2012. This one was completed 2021 or 22. I can't remember. Next. Oh, that's it. Are we done? Oh, no, wait. Oh, wait, there. Oh, there we go.
Okay. So, yeah, so that's the end of the slideshow. I see that there are a couple of other questions. So let me get to those. So I'm just expressing an appreciation for your work. It was really fun to see all of the variety of images and how they've evolved over the years. Someone is asking, when creating the really detailed imagery, such as leaves, flower petals, thinking of even like the ironwork in the Paris daytime piece, how small do you go with the fabric pieces versus adding detail with paint?
Good question. I've done, you know, there are pieces that I've done that literally are smaller than the fingernail on my little finger. So some of the pieces can get pretty small. And sometimes it's necessary because there's the fabric. I don't know what it is about the fabric, but it's more dynamic and it has a more bold. When I apply it to the canvas, it's bolder. When I try to paint that, it's not nearly as obvious. So I usually am using my paints to do shadowing. You know, create well, on this piece, you know, you can see where I've come up here and just kind of added some darks on the handle to the basket. It just really kind of depends. But some of the architectural pieces require some really small pieces.
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify, is the black borders, the person's asking, is the black border paint or thread?
Are you looking like here?
I believe so. I believe so. Maybe some of the outlining that you were doing, we might need to clarify that question.
Again, there's more outlining in these Cezannes than what I normally do in a still life. But and I should tell you that I use a lot of grays, but grays and fabrics have been hard for me to find. So but black is really easy. So what you've seen on here is all the darks on this started with a black suede. But what I'm doing now, and what I really like about using black, is that I will not keep it black. I will start adding sepias and ultramarines, blues and browns on top of the black. And to me, it makes a more beautiful gray or blue or brown if you start with the black and then work it back dark to light. Okay. And that's all, again, all of this, because I don't have the gray that I want, I started with black suede. You can see where I've actually added some green on this fruit here.
Okay, just a reminder to our attendees, if you have another question or if you'd like something clarified, if we didn't quite get the full answer that you were looking for, please go ahead and put that into the Q&A. There's a couple of comments just about the phenomenal amount of work and dedication that goes into each of these pieces. Do you have a guess of approximately how much time, an average of the amount of time you spend on your pieces?
The portraits have been the fastest. And a lot of people, they look at my collages and they don't think I could do a portrait in collage, but to me, it's all about shapes. I forgot your question. I'm getting off. What was your question, Barry? I'm sorry.
If there's, just generally a sense of how long each piece takes.
Oh, the portraits, I can do a portrait in a week. 40 to 60 hours, I can do a portrait. Most in a simple still life, I can do in a week also. But when I get into the landscape that I showed you earlier of San Miguel, that's a 24 by 30, and that will take me a couple weeks. So it could be 80 hours. It could be a little more than that. When I work here, I'll show you this one again. This also, you can see the lighter stitching in the sky, if you notice.
Yes, thank you.
But this piece, I'm sure I've got a couple weeks, maybe more, and at least 80 hours. And then a piece that takes me 80 hours will take my seamstress 10 to stitch it.
Wow. Okay. And someone is asking is there a particular brand of acrylic paint that you use?
No. I'm probably ashamed of myself for using cheap acrylic paint, but my kids buy me paints for Christmas, and acrylic is pretty durable stuff. So I'm not worried about it. I mean, I think that it's acrylic is acrylic. I mean, I think that there's a better acrylic I could buy, but I haven't had any problem with cracking or aging over the years.
Okay, well, we'll allow just another minute or two for questions here. But you mentioned in some of our conversations that with the change in seasons, you're getting back into your studio and doing more work there at home. What's next for you?
Good question. I've got 2 portraits. I've got to do a double portrait and then another portrait. And my most recent trip was to Mexico. We were in Mexico last May, and I've just completed 2 pieces from that. So some landscapes from San Miguel will be on my spring schedule. Some portraits, and I'm sure I'll get a still life or 2 worked in. This one will be done in another few days, and I don't. There's not one. I mean, I've sold a lot of stuff, and I never know which one I'm going to sell next. And there's never been more demand for one than the other. It's just I mostly do what I want to do, and I'm fortunate enough to find somebody that likes them.
Absolutely. Can you tell us just a little bit about the show at the 20 North Gallery in Toledo?
Yes, I've got, I think, 16 pieces or 17 pieces hanging over there. And they selected a really nice range of work from earlier stuff from the 90s right up and through. I actually had enough time this summer to do a couple pieces of Toledo. but it's a lovely gallery. And they have a lovely website, and you can see all the work I have on their website with prices. If you're in the Toledo area, you should stop in. It's a lovely gallery, lovely owners, and a lovely gallery. I'm proud to be showing there.
Great. Well, thank you. And so we will be including the link to your website, a link to the Hoosier Salon, the Indiana Artists Club, which you've also worked with, as well as a link to that exhibit at the 20 North Gallery in Toledo in a follow-up email tonight. But it looks like we've answered all of the questions. So I think unless you have any final thoughts to give us, I think we can close for this evening.
No, I'm finished, I think. Thank you all for your time.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And thanks again to your expert camera person there. So we'll say good night to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, our next art demo with the DuPage Art League is going to be on Monday, January 15th. That program will be hybrid. So you can attend either in person or virtually, and we will be featuring artist and teacher Dan Danielson. So thanks again for joining us tonight. Thank you especially to you, Joel. This was wonderful. And we will try and get it up pretty soon. We'll send you the link to the recording. If you are watching the recording of this program and would like those links that we mentioned to the gallery and the Hoosier Salon, et cetera, and Joel's website, just email me at ce@wheatonlibrary.org. That's CE for community engagement at wheatonlibrary.org, and I'd be happy to send those out to you. But once again, thanks for joining us. Good night, everybody. Take care, and we hope to see you again soon. Good night.
Good night.